Hello and welcome once again to another edition of the hashtag Facts Matter podcast. I'm Guy Gordon, joined by Eric Lupher, president of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan, as we continue our deep dive into the issue of a constitutional convention. We know November of 26. Michigan voters will be asked, as they are every decade and a half or so, whether or not they want to hold a constitutional convention and undertake reforms to Michigan's constitution. And today we're going to look at Article VII, which covers a lot of ground, Eric, in terms of local governments. And this could be a fertile area for reform.
You know, this is one of the few articles of our current Constitution that hasn't been amended, hasn't even had proposals for amendment that have made it to the ballot. And yet there's a lot of meat there. There's a lot of substantive issues that a constitutional convention might tackle. And I really think it speaks to why not everything can be done through the amendment process. That
Right.
in this case, there are no champions for some of the issues we're going to discuss that will go out and circulate petitions or bring those issues to the legislature. And so having the citizens look at this in a holistic way and ask what we want of our local government structure is something that's really going to happen through a con process and not through tinkering around the edges.
And while there have been no wholesale amendments to Article 7, there have been a lot of niggling statutory changes and court cases that have come down that have impacted these, especially in relation to home rule. And we'll get to that in a moment. But let's just start with the structure of local government. We can trace the roots to how our townships, counties, municipalities have been structured, back to 1787.
Yeah, that's the interesting part. The Northwest Ordinance back in the Thomas Jefferson is our third president. Being a surveyor himself, somebody who tinkered with that, set surveyors to say, now that we have this territory, go figure out what's there and do so by marking it off in square areas that are easily recognizable. And today we call those townships. We have cities that have developed, usually close to water, sort of where commerce was most possible back in the day. As areas of township grew bigger, they created villages to provide higher amounts of service than a township was inclined to, until today. Now townships and cities are remarkably the same, but back then,
how many townships are larger than cities now? You look at West Bloomfield down here in Oakland County. We've got Canton Township that dwarf the surrounding area.
There are, yeah. So we've lost some of the nuance that was once in our statutory definition of what local government should look like, but our Constitution provides for counties, townships, cities. We statutorily provide for villages. We have both constitutionally and statutorily the authority to create special authorities to provide services as a standalone unit of government. And today we have over 1,800 local units of government. The good news is
more or less, are the numbers shrinking, or are they growing? Because we've seen some incorporations and mergers and things like that, regional efforts to regionalize.
Our paper documents that in 1962 we had 1,851 counties, townships, cities, and villages, and 99 special authorities. And in 2020 we had 1,856, so 5 more general purpose local governments and 437 special authorities, so 338 more special authorities. So while there has been consolidation of some governments, we've had townships become cities. Southfield, Livonia, places like that have just taken the township and become a city. For the most part, we're just changing the names of them, the status of township or city. We're not shrinking them.
Mm-hmm.
So I started to say the good news is that's government close to the people, right? As a state that values democracy and home rule and the ability to make your own decisions, you have small government that people have a strong voice in. The bad news is that it's inefficient. We have a lot of duplication of service provision, of decision makers. And as you're trying to attract business, if they come in and they have to deal with one set of decision makers on one side of the road and a different set on another side of the road, and the nuance and building code and regulatory issues and things like that, it has become, to some extent, a detriment as we try to do economic development and bring people into the state based on little dotted lines on a map that mean nothing in the business community.
Right. So, will we see an attempt to clarify some of the power dynamics here and to kind of reinvent some of these local governments?
That depends on what a constitutional convention, sort of what the body looks like. There was clearly an effort in the 1960s with our 1961 Constitutional Convention to do something about that, to look at townships. But the structure, how we elected delegates back then, and a very strong lobby by the Township Association meant that we kept townships. In fact, we strengthened them in some ways. And so I would suppose if we had a constitutional convention in 2027, again, townships would put up their defenses and do what they can to maintain those units of government. It requires a strong look and vested look to try to figure this out. But I don't think just by having a constitutional convention, we can assume that there would be change.
Well, not necessarily change, but as you talk about, they're going to defend some of their territory. Let's be clear about what they're defending. Would it be control over elections, tax assessments? What powers would they be seeking to preserve?
Yeah. So the Constitution provides that the townships should exist and provides some minimum assignment of powers, but most of that is done statutorily,
Hmm.
and could be changed statutorily. So right now, townships are vested with running election, assessing property for the purposes of property taxation, and collecting property taxes to distribute them to the counties, the schools, the state, everyone else
Hmm.
that levies taxes on the properties within the township. And they have a broad set of powers beyond that, to the extent that we can say we have townships now bigger than cities, and they quack like a city and walk like a city and don't call themselves a city. So we could do a whole lot statutorily. The question is, should a constitutional convention look at that and say, listen, having cities and counties is maybe enough. Maybe we need to do
Hmm.
away with villages. Most villages are about 2 square miles and 2,000 people or so. And living in Livonia, or think a lot of urban places around us, that's my subdivision.
Right.
It's, not really big. And so there's a whole lot of inefficiency built into that. It's power close to the people, but there's inefficiencies by having that.
For the uninitiated, explain what a special authority is and what its role is.
Right. So there are services that the economies and the expense of providing them are bigger than a city. And when I say that, I'm not talking about a Detroit city, but a Manistee, the typical city in Michigan, very small, bigger than your typical township. Fire protection, libraries, swimming pool districts, ambulance provision, a whole bunch of
Parks and Rec.
services.
Yeah.
So the special authority laws allow local governments to get together and say, we think this is important. Our citizens have indicated a desire to have this service provided. We can't do it alone. Will you, my neighboring township or city, collaborate with us? And together we will pitch in for the expense of providing that, or sometimes levy a tax on the citizens to provide that. And then that becomes a standalone unit of government for the sole purpose of providing that service, for running a library district, for providing fire protection, for whatever it is. So the good news is that the services are being provided, being done typically in an economic way,
Mm-hmm.
The bad news is when we think about government and trying to create economies, if you have a multi-purpose unit of government, then they can say, we have all of these needs and a limited amount of money. How are we going to distribute those scarce resources and prioritize them?
Mm-hmm.
These standalone services, um, they sort of set their own budget and go forward within reason, right? Whatever the
Right.
tax base is, whatever. But there isn't the balance of fire protection against refuse collection or running elections or other things. It becomes its own standalone service.
I guess one of the other, the key question, if delegates were to approach something like this, would be efficiency and effectiveness. Would those be the two key questions that they would be asking as they look to reform this?
Those two things, but balancing that against accountability and having government close
Okay.
to the people.
So one of the other interesting pieces in your paper was this section 29 that would control municipal control of highways and right of ways. There have been some erosions of the just compensation that, for instance, if a utility were to take or use some of these right of ways, how is how might that be a source of tension going forward?
Yeah, this fits into the bigger conversation on home rule. So again, for the uninitiated, we have among the different states, different levels of discretion provided by state constitutions and state law to the local governments.
Hmm.
In some states, many of our southern states, for example, there's almost no home rule. The state legislature decides for every city how much power the mayor will have, whether the city clerk shall be appointed or elected independently, what the laws are, to the extent, if you can think back, this is a little dated, but it's a great example. When there was the pushback down in some of the southern states on undoing the celebration of the Confederacy and empowering people, and they wanted to tear down the statutes of Civil War generals in many of the cities couldn't decide to do that on their own. They had to go to the legislature to get the authority to do that. You contrast that against a state like Michigan with a constitution that would seem to provide very strong home rule powers, where every city decides on its own whether to have a independently elected mayor or choose the mayor from city council, whether to elect the city clerk and the treasurer or have those people appointed, to create your own ordinances to decide what services are provided in what way and what level of taxation within a limit. Our Constitution, many scholars would say, many academics that have looked at the different states,
Hmm.
Michigan, at least constitutionally, has a very strong home rule state. But what's happened over time is the legislature has basically said, I don't care. Speaking as one unit, one entity, the legislature continues to enact laws that just usurp the authority of local governments to make their own decisions, to do things that they want. And the issue that you raise with the rents, for those only listening online, sort of air quotes around the word rents, but when you have right of way, the roadways, the space set aside, the Constitution would suggest that those utilities or the businesses using those right of ways should compensate the local government for that use. There's a public use, and some sort of rents would help the local governments to maintain that area and balance the utilities versus the other uses in that right of way. And the legislature has just sort of squashed that and say the economic interest of the businesses are greater than the individual interest of the local governments.
And we've seen that especially when it comes to conversations over data centers, windmills. Yeah, and I go back to maybe the Goshen plant up in Big Rapids, where there was a lot of tension between economic development officials from the state and the township officials who said,
Ye-
we're concerned about this.
Yeah, I mean, so what you describe is more on the home rule side. These
Right.
rents are more like the cable television back when that was a thing, and their ability to put the cable along the phone lines, the power poles, should they have to pay
Right.
the township or the city some sort of fee uh, to be able to do that. And the state laws are written in a way that the need to connect the consumers to the internet and provide television and telephone services
Right.
sort of trump the will of the local governments.
Well, in the example that you used was the city of Taylor wanted to remove some power poles along a troublesome 4-mile stretch of road, put them underground so that there was less likelihood of a collision with a power pole, and they wanted the utilities to pay for that. And they came away with an unsatisfactory result.
Again, because the state legislature and the courts, in looking at those decisions, have decided that the economic interest of the businesses was greater than the interest of the local governments, even though they were
Right.
trying to do something for the public safety of all residents of the state.
So let's widen the lens a little bit here. We were talking about Section 29, and that was probably my mistake by going so narrow early in this home rule conversation. But let's take a look at this and the way it's manifesting itself when we talk about data centers, windmills, auto plants that may be sited in areas that want to keep their rural character. Who wins those arguments, and could that be decided in a constitutional convention?
Yeah, I mean, it goes on many, many issues. Ann Arbor tried to outlaw the use of plastic bags in grocery stores. It's just many issues. And the issue, whether you agree with that or not, the issue is, should local governments just try to decide what's in their best interest as they hear from their constituencies, or should those decisions be made in Lansing? One entity, and you think about the differences ranging from Detroit, a city of 600,000 people, to the tip of the Keweenaw Peninsula with a couple thousand people. Very different between urban and rural. And one would argue a one-size-fits-all approach to local government just isn't appropriate. So the legislature has repeatedly said that the state interest, the economic interest of economic development, is greater than that home rule desire of local governments to be making their own decisions. Now, the tension, you'll recall early in our series that our advice to anybody taking on the role of being a constitutional convention delegate is to create the structure upon which laws could be written. We see this here in our 63 Constitution, that the Constitution very clearly says that cities and counties should have home rule authority and be able to make their own decisions. Would we want a constitutional convention coming in 2027 and saying we have to beef that up in some way? If that's the
Hmm.
way they want to go, they could say, we could weaken it. But assuming that they say we want to maintain Michigan as a home rule state, in what ways do you put more language in to say we really mean it, without getting so detailed that it becomes
Right.
less of an evergreen document that will be pertinent 50, 70, 100 years from now? Do you put in some language that say local governments get to decide where to put data centers, when data centers might be a passing phase?
Right.
In 1963, we didn't even know what a data center was. So there's a real tension there that the delegates will have to navigate if there is a convention.
So we're kind of reaching the end of our allotted time here, but we have seen with every article, there is kind of a cleanup in aisle five task that needs to be done where our Constitution, or at least this Article 7, may be in conflict with our federal Constitution. There's some of those things here. Is there a need for cleanup to tidy up where those conflicts arise?
There's a need to do that just to make the Constitution consistent with practice, so that any citizen could pick up their state constitution and understand how government works. The example in the local government article is the governance of county government. You'll recall back in the election section, we talked about at the time the delegates were meeting in Lansing to create our 1963 Constitution, there were issues playing out nationwide on how elected officials could be selected. And that ended up in the U.S. Supreme Court saying one man, one vote is necessary.
Exactly.
Proportional election. Well, we didn't know that when we were voting on the 1963 Constitution or when they were drafting it. And they carried forward provisions from earlier constitutions that said that the counties would be governed by what was called a board of supervisors. And those board of supervisors would be made up of one delegate, one supervisor. Every township has a supervisor, and they become part of the board of supervisors at the county level, and a number of representatives from every city proportional to the size of the city. Well, right away, you can look at any county in Michigan and see there's one small, lightly populated township of 1,000 people, and then, down the road, one of 100,000 people or more than that maybe. And for them to have equal representation would be contrary to that one man, one vote. So there was a Michigan Supreme Court decision saying, yeah, that doesn't work. It's in conflict with the one man, one vote. The legislature enacted a law saying we're going to create a county board of commissioners with equal representation of the county commissioners. We have to apportion the county population after each census and make sure it's equal. So in law, we are doing one thing. It's working. The Constitution says something different that we're just ignoring. Do we need a constitutional convention to fix it? Well, the law says we already fixed it. But again, if that's the best way to do it, let's put it in the Constitution. Let's clean it up. The other part with the counties, we have independently elected sheriff, prosecuting attorney, treasurer, register of deeds, all these independently elected and officers, each with their own fiefdoms. Each one then at the time of creating a county budget coming in saying, my service is the most important service the county does, and you should give me the most amount of money. And to work around that, we created charter counties and try to create some order to it. But it's not clear that having a county administrator, we have several counties that have adopted that charter counties, but have that county administrator, that their powers are greater than those independently elected officials. So I think a constitutional convention will want to try to make sense of that. If there is a charter county, should those officials be chosen in a different way? Should we be clear that the county administrator has some supervisor authority over there and the ability to offer budgets? Ultimately, it's the county commission that sets the budget, but the ability to work through those types of issues. So, not grand in scale, but county government has the potential to be one of our most significant local government levels of government, what I'm trying to say here. And we sort of handicapped it and we shackle it with its ability to do that. So a constitutional convention might be able to take off some of those shackles and make it better able to serve the people.
Yeah. There's also the issue that we've discussed frequently about the giving more power to local units of government to raise revenues. Right now, they're handcuffed, but that would be a discussion for a later time when we tackle Article 9, and we'll look forward to that later on this summer. Any final thoughts, Eric, on Article 7 before we wrap it up?
We covered a lot of ground. We encourage everyone to come and look at these papers. They're on our website, and we're going to continue to work on it. We're going to take a little bit of time in the heat of the summer to enjoy the outdoors, and some of the staff going to take some downtime, but we'll be back at the end of July with our education article and think about our universities and public schools and libraries and all that kind of fun stuff.
All right. And you can find all of that at crcmich.org. Until next time, Eric, thanks very much.
Thank you. We'll see everyone soon.
And we thank you for joining us here, and we want you to recommend our Facts Matter podcast to your friends, either through Spotify, Apple. Tell them that there is an unbiased discussion of actual policy going on with the Facts Matter podcast from the CRC, and perhaps they would appreciate it as you do. Until next time, take care. I'm Guy Gordon.
The Citizens Research Council of Michigan has been providing lawmakers, academics, the media, philanthropists, business leaders, voters, and all Michiganders with factual, unbiased, independent information on significant issues concerning state and local government organization and finance. For over a century, our research is available to you. Go online at crcmich.org and on all the social media platforms, Twitter, Blue Sky, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and download our research. Check out our numerous papers and blogs, and listen to our podcasts. And while you're there, please consider supporting our research with a donation. This has been a Facts Matter podcast, a presentation of the Citizens Research Council of Michigan.